nutrition, lifestyle, and PED education. This is the Elite Strength Podcast with Aaron Scarfy.
All right, guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Elite Strength Podcast here with my boy James Mack, the not underrated, probably the lesser known of the Prescript crew, but I'm going to put money on it now. He's probably smarter than Jordan. So how are you, James?
Yeah, good. Thanks to you, man. I appreciate the offer to come on.
No, if Jordan ever hears that, he's probably going to kill me, but that's fine.
And he'll probably kill me as well. We'll both get thrown under the same bus. Definitely not smarter than that, dude.
Nah, just stirring.
Yeah,
how you been, man? What's been happening?
Good, man. Just finished a quick session about an hour ago. Got some food in. Feeling pretty good. Training's going well. Yourself?
Training for anything specific?
Man, right now I train to avoid surgery. And that sounds so bad. But that's literally my life. So it's like I've got another hip replacement on the cards. And right now training is just prolonging that as long as possible. That's literally my goal, which has been a super interesting perspective from the mental side of just being able to still drive adaptations and drive performance to a certain degree, knowing that there's this negative thing at the end of the day that's going to happen. So from the mental side, it's been super interesting kind of playing around with that. And then obviously trying to find certain exercises, certain ranges, certain strength profiles that I can actually create tension and create some form of that adaptation to occur, and that limits the daily pain or just general pain pain in general around my actual hip. And that's been a cool coaching endeavor, I suppose. And being able to use those principles into the clientele that I work with, and just looking at general training and general training principles, like taking that and adding it in and going like, cool, can we make this better? Can we make this worse? What have I experienced personally from this deep dive, I suppose, and start to layer that onto like my Gen Pop clients, for example. It's like, can we take these personal principles that I'm starting to pick up and let's start layering them into their programs and their program design, which has been really cool. I'm seeing good progress from that type of stuff. So yeah, man.
What's the what actually happened with your injury, if you don't mind me asking? I guess what caused the hip? So
I tore my labrum in 2015, July 2015, or I was diagnosed with a torn labrum. Prepped for Commonwealth, went over to Commonwealth, came back, had the labrum repaired. Literally waking up out of the surgery, I was like, something's wrong. They were like, what are you talking about? I was like, no, trust me, something's wrong. 3 months later, re-diagnosed with the labrum tear again. So the surgery had failed and the anchors pulled out of the acetabulum. Same thing. They like fixed it, supposedly better. About 6 months into that, just like went through like hardcore depression, hardcore like pain through the roof. Couldn't figure out what was going on. Long story short, landed up with AV necrosis of head of femur. So lack of blood flow into the head of femur, and basically it dying. So good old age of 21, full hip replacement. So stem and acetabulum had to be done. 2 years post that, went in for my checkup, thought everything was great, had a bit of pain going on, and they turned around and said, listen, body's rejected the implant. We need to go in and redo the whole thing again. I was like, fantastic. It's always nice being told the hip that was supposed to last you 15 years lasted 2. There's only a certain number of these surgeries you can have. So that's also the downside of it. So, went in for that. Second one done, found a few other problems with that. There was what's called MO. So basically calcification of muscles. It's myofibrillosis or some shit like that. And my psoas basically started turning into a bone, which was fun. So went in for
myofibrillar isolation.
That's the one. So landed up having to have chemo and radiation on that. So that was quite fun. A year later after that, went for my checkup here in Australia after moving over. And they've kind of turned around and said, listen, man, your body's rejecting this implant as well. So I'm due for the third revision, prolonging that as long as possible due to the high risks, high complications. Amputation is on the cards, unfortunately, with this one, if it fucks up. Just because of the complete damage that has occurred to the femur.
Yes.
With the way that they would have to kind of do the next one, they'll end up kind of opening up the femur in a way that, has a very high risk for it to kind of heal afterwards. So prolonging it as long as we can,
Of course, man. That makes sense. I guess, is there any surgeons that you'd sort of been researching or looking at to do this particular type of, operation, I guess?
Yeah. So surprisingly enough, I've gone through about 6 different surgeons in Australia.
Yeah. Okay.
5 of those refusing to operate just because they don't want to take the risk. Which is always a good.
Fair. I mean, probably a good thing, right?
You know what? Fair enough on the surgeon and on the doctors. Like, it's not a nice thing to hear as a person to be like the surgeon saying like, you're too high risk. Like, I don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. That kind of like exacerbates the degree of how bad this actually is. Mm-hmm. There's one surgeon who is down in Sydney. His name's Julian Yu, robotic surgeon, which was also pretty cool. Very well decorated young surgeon. So,
yes,
young in terms of probably a little bit more ballsy from that side, but has very good track record. Him and his mentor are the only ones who have agreed to do it at some stage, if that were the case.
Okay.
If and when that happens. But all the advice from them is, hey, let's push it until you are, begging to have the surgery done from a pain perspective. Fair. So, yeah, man.
And I guess how's the pain now?
Oh, dude, I live with like a constant 4 out of 10 pain every day.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's there, but it's
annoying.
One of those, it's annoying. It's so annoying.
It's not painful, like it's debilitating. It's just annoying.
Yeah, it's just annoying. It's just always there. And then I have like bad flare-ups every now and then, and that's the shitty side.
Yeah, shit. Fair enough, man.
Could be worse, dude. That's kind
of. Well, I guess probably no better person to speak to about training stuff then when it comes to workarounds and whatnot. I mean,
I've experimented enough on myself. That it's not the be all and end all, but that definitely makes a difference when you start trying to work with people who are injured and they're trying to keep them performing or keep them trying to train. I suppose that motto of like, we're trying to take you from pain to performance. That's literally it. Like, everything to me is some form of performance, even if it's a Gen Pop client. It's like performance. I think gets the blanket statement of it being like athletic based, where I kind of look at performance as like performance could be your Gen Pop literally being able to play with their kids.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
that's a performance. It's in my head. It's context. Yeah. Exactly. It's context dependent. And you probably have seen it as well. It's like we get so many clients who are training through these niggles, these problems, these painful strategies that they're going through all the time, that they, with simple tweaks or better programming and better execution, and maybe we can tie into it in a little bit, but like better resistance profile orientation, they can actually decrease the amount of pain they're in and hopefully drive them more towards that side of performance.
Yes.
So, playing around with those and starting to create like a playbook or an index around different exercises with these strength curves around injuries has been something that's like been on the cards, I suppose, for the last like 12 to 18 months, specifically after kind of moving into the Prescript model and falling under the Jordans. Like, that's how I know Jordan from when I was in trouble in 2015, 2016. Like, I reached out to him back then. And obviously he was, putting out content from that side. And my goal was always to try and attend some form of seminar or course. Obviously, living in South Africa, that didn't really help.
Of course.
And with an exchange rate of like 1 to 13, it really sucks when you've got to pay like 15,000 Rand for a course. Like, that's 15,000 Rand, to give you a rough idea. That's a really good salary in South Africa. That's 15,000 Rand a month. So that's a month's salary for an education course. Like, it hurts. It fucking hurts.
I could only imagine, dude. Man, so you would have experienced even the Australian dollar compared to the US. Bloody hurts. Imagine.
Every time I spend Australian to US, I'm like, this is fine. This is cool. Versus like 1 to 13. Like, you used to feel it in your bones every time you spent like an Australian or a US dollar in South Africa. It was crazy. Yeah,
no, that's completely fair, man. I guess before we break into a bit of actual training talk, how did you get sort of involved in coaching and helping out there with Prescript?
So to be honest, I fell into Jordan, I suppose, from that side. Like, I was obviously taking Prescript level 1. He was out here in Australia at the time, in like over the December period. And like, I just reached out to him. I just received the bad news about the implant kind of failing again. I just reached out to him, and obviously we were chatting through the course. But I reached out to him and was like, hey man, like I've got a problem. Like I really need some form of help around this. Can we do a consult? Can we do something? And he like immediately was like, hey man, I'm in Coogee. So anyone who's kind of listening to this, if you're in Sydney based, you understand that I was North Sydney. He's like, pull through. I'll be at this cafe. Come, let's have a chat. Let's see what he can do. And dude, like all like respect to him. He dropped everything he could and he'd help me out as best as he can. He just started kind of helping me in terms of integrating a program design, to help me build out some form of assessment-based structure. And like, just, that was it for free, no problems. And like it from that, it kind of just, he then kind of flew away, and then kind of COVID hit and he was stuck in Sydney, and he just reached out and we trained a little bit together, and just, I don't know, man, he clearly saw something, and that was that. Cool.
Yeah, no, hey, it's a good way to go about it, man.
Exactly. I think it also came down to like our values were very similar from that side. Like some of the conversations we had, like I was going through a bit of a bad time with an employer at that time. And then employer, I suppose, is known for being not the most valued or valued of their staff person. Like I made it known to Jordan at that time, like this was against my values and against, like, my biggest one is obviously integrity from that side. And that obviously did some form of, or showed some form of respect or whatever, sticking up for your values and morals around that. And that kind of, I don't know, bonded us, if that was the right word.
No, I get you.
And then just kind of hung out with him, trained quite a bit. And then just, he offered me opportunity to kind of run like the lab section for Prescript.
Yeah, cool.
That's pretty much it, man. Shoot the shit every week with like all the students, go through questions, like different conceptualized models, which is really cool. Like I like the idea of, I don't know if you did labs in university back in like similar structure. The nice thing is, and I find, I don't know how you study and stuff like that, but I like being able to apply the model or go through whatever we've learned to like start applying it. Like, cool, can we actually make this work for Gen Pop? Can we make this work for baseball player? Can we make this work for, middle range athletes? Like there's so many ways that I think the education model falls short because there's no application. It's like,
I was going to say, it's all theoretical and no application. Application is obviously one of the better ways for all of us to learn in this industry, right?
And 100%.
Kind of our job.
But it should be our job from that perspective. Like, like I'm not the smartest dude in the world, to be 100% honest, but it's like, I can take a model, and as soon as you get me to physically understand, like I have to play with it. I have to understand it from that structure. It's like, I know it, I'll be able to teach it. It's like, we had a saying back in South Africa at the one hospital that I worked at as a paramedic. It's like, you see one, do one, teach one. It's the greatest saying in the world. It's like, you see, so what you would do is you'd see an operation, you do an operation, you teach it. It's like, it's the same thing that I think we should be doing in terms of personal training, coaching. It's like, let's see an education model. Let's see, I don't know, an assessment, a structure, whatever it is from that side. It's like, go and do it. Do it on a client, do it on yourself, do it on a family member, whatever it is, teach it. Teach it to your mother. Teach it to your dog. Do you know how many conversations I have with that golden retriever over there? It's like, he probably thinks I'm more loopy than my neighbor, but it's like that. And that's for me, what that does is just helps me ingrain the thought pattern and the structure of what's going on. And I can kind of like put the pieces of the puzzle together. Yeah,
definitely. Man, it makes complete sense. And I think it's funny. I think that probably also comes with a little bit of experience, understanding that, you can have all the theoretical knowledge in the world, but until you start actually applying it and seeing what actually really works for the outcome that you're trying to achieve, it's like, well, majority of the stuff you learn is kind of shit.
And that's exactly it. It's like, you can understand like an exercise. Let's take my recent post, I suppose. It's like the recent post is like about the RDL, and I look at an RDL, and we can have this conversation at some stage, but an RDL for me is a mid-range exercise of the glutes. Okay. If you have to look at it if you take out your stupid protractor and you have a look at, like, you go from 0 to 120, it's like the way that we end and where we end our range, and that it's like, it's spot on in the middle. So you should know what it is. It's a mid-range exercise. So the way that I look at mid-range exercises is, a mid-range exercise is like, you drive as much intensity as you can through a mid-range exercise. It's the goal. That's where you're going to be the strongest. We understand that in terms of strength curves, it's like, in resistance profiles, it's like mid-range, you are your strongest. So go to fucking town, put weight on the bar, drive as much weight as you can through that range because you're safe and it's your strongest position.
Yes.
Perfect. It's like your shortened and your lengthened positions are your weakest. Yes. So we keep seeing people do these weak ranged movements and loading with as heavy a weight as possible. Like, to me, that doesn't make sense. It's like you're your weakest. You don't have the ability to drive as much tension there.
Yes.
Why are we trying to load it as heavy as something in a mid-range, for example?
Yes.
So my post going back to it, which supposedly flew over the head of some people, you picked it up perfectly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just for you. It's like I sat there going, like, we do it. We've taken a really, really good exercise. Like, I love an RDL. I love an RDL because we can drive that much weight. We can get so much out of it. Yeah. We've taken an RDL and then we've added a band to a rack to then supposedly increase the tension in the shortened range at the top of the lockout.
Yes.
You might as well run around the gym, dry fucking the air and get the same amount of tension out of it. Like, that's how I was, okay, maybe a little bit more tension because you've got a band there, but it's, if I really wanted to hammer down and like try and dry fuck the air, I probably could create the same amount of tension. Now what we've done is we've taken the ability to load a barbell as heavy as we can with, obviously technique matters in this. Let's put the blanket statement out there, but it's like we've taken a barbell where I look at a barbell as like the heaviest, the ability to load the heaviest amount of weight as possible on a barbell. That's where we express strength. So we've taken a barbell, we've loaded it. We should be loading it as heavy as we can, but because we put this band around our legs and around our waist, hips, and then we've tried to, I don't know, have you ever tried to lift up a bar with a band around your hips?
The safety of the movement is compromised hugely. Yeah, I agree with that.
Everything's fucked. So you've got a band pulling you back while you're trying to walk forward to pick up a barbell to then try and drive as much adaptation. Like, it doesn't make any sense to supposedly, I don't know, maybe now challenge the shortened range a little bit better at the top.
Yes.
You know what challenges the shortened range? A 45-degree back extension.
Yeah. I was going to say a hip extension, back extension.
Some form of hip extension. It's like, so instead of, trying to fuck up two movements, because now you can't load your mid-range as heavy as you want. Yes. And your shortened range is, to be honest, that's the stupidest thing, in my opinion. Someone can fight me on it, whatever. But someone will fight me on it, I'm sure. But I'm just saying that, like, so we've taken the potential to load the movement that we should be loading as hard, as heavy as we can to express the strength, to gain the adaptations that we should be from that movement. And we fucked up both.
Yes. So I guess my question to that would be, would we be applying the same system, I guess, to the two types of clients being, let's say we've got two advanced athletes, just make it easier for us. We have one that's hypertrophy, let's say bodybuilding, stage bodybuilding type versus powerlifting, or strongman, where I think, we dabble a bit of in both. So when we're looking at muscle hypertrophy itself, for example, completely agree, mid-range, load it to shit, go have fun, don't die. Like, I get it. But when it comes to, I guess, trying to increase is the wrong word, trying to get into the shortened position, would we still be applying the same theory that you're sort of proposing, or that you had in your post? Not so much for that exercise, because I agree, the exercise with the band is stupid. But I mean, you go on.
So what I look at it, so how I've overlapped these principles and started to create this index that I was originally talking about is I've associated the medium with certain rep ranges. And what I mean by, and usually with these mediums, they express a certain resistance profile and strength curve. So what I mean by that is, as I alluded to originally, it's like a barbell is generally going to express the most amount of strength. We're going to load the fuck out of it. Depending on a skill level, and we can talk about skill level in a bit, but depending on skill level with these two advanced athletes that we have in terms of hypertrophy and powerlifting, it's like a barbell is there to drive as much load as possible, much intensity. We understand in terms of hypertrophy, intensity is obviously one of the building blocks of the pyramids, or one of the blocks of the pyramids that we need. The other one being obviously metabolic stress, so some form of tension from that perspective. Muscular damage being more byproduct. We can get into that from eccentrics, etc. So I look at a barbell being something as heavy as possible. Cool. Dumbbells generally going to be slightly less. You're not going to be able to express as much load because generally, like most people can't press, 200 kilograms on a fucking dumbbell or RDL 200 kilos on 2 dumbbells versus barbell, for example. Safer manner, better ability to express that strength. That's kind of the medium being the thing. Machines being the next one, and then cables being something like one of the other mediums. Now, what I've done is I've assigned rep ranges to these mediums to give me a blanket statement. I don't like the blanket statement, to give me a rough idea of.
Yeah, it gives you an idea. Yeah, it's like your landmarks almost.
Correct. It's my landmarks. Yeah. It's my rep ranges is what I kind of, all my rep marks, my rep, whatever the fuck I called them, whatever back in the day. So essentially a barbell, I'd look to express that strength. Okay. Move as much load as possible. Yep. Rep ranges for that could be anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8. Yes. It's a really nice rep range. It's cool for expressing strength. We're getting the adaptations we need from a neurological and also attention in terms of intensity. Cool. Yes. Dumbbells fit into that range again, like a 6 to 10-ish, because once again, it's a nice expression. It's not as much as barbell, but it still allows us to kind of drive that. It's predominantly going to be a mid-range movement. If you think about the movements that would be associated with a dumbbell, like a dumbbell press, maybe a dumbbell RDL. Once again, I throw the mid-range into that lower rep range because we should be loading.
Able to load it. Yep.
Correct. When we get to machines and then cables, obviously dependent on that, but I kind of tend to stick within a 12, 15, even 20 reps as my guidelines. Why? Because most of the machines that we use are going to either be putting us in a shortened position or a lengthened position.
Yes.
Where we are the weakest.
Yes.
Where we could actually benefit from being in these positions depending on the exercise that we pick. For example, I know like Prescript, we tend to use this a lot because it's a really good example. A high cable bicep curl.
Yes.
Predominantly loading the shortened range of the bicep in that overhead position. So we're now training someone in the overhead position. We're giving them and we're exposing them to an overhead position, which if we had to think about it, most bodybuilders are really shit at.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. So in this overhead position, we are now training the bicep in the shortened position, which is obviously one of the strength goals where we do want to actually try and get into. But the benefits of staying in this position, it's like we've now got upward rotation of the scapula. We've now got the serratus having to work to stabilize the shoulder. What problems do we generally see within bodybuilders? They load the mid-range, load the mid-range, load the mid-range to the point where they have no overhead mobility. Their shoulders are internally rotated. They've got, pecs are too tight and everyone thinks I need to just train more pec to have a bigger chest. Whereas now what I've done is I've gone, okay, let's expose you to a shortened ranged movement, being this high bicep cable curl. I put you in this overhead position. We're now spending time here. It would be really, really stupid or inefficient. Sorry, stupid is the wrong word. Inefficient for me to try and load the high bicep cable curl as heavy as I wanted to and get 4 to 6 reps for the 2 reasons of 1, it's a shortened range movement. It's not where we express strength. 2, the added benefit of staying in that overhead position, that upwardly rotated scapula, that serratus having to fire to increase shoulder stability.
Yes.
It's like that needs time. How many seconds are you going to take when you stand, like you sit and you do 4 reps? If it's an average tempo, maybe 8 seconds, 9, 10 seconds. 12 to 15 reps. Fuck, we've put someone here 40 seconds, maybe a minute. It's like that's a minute of an integrated rehabilitation exercise, which allows us, and I kind of look at it as like, especially with bodybuilders, it now allows me to keep them injury-free for longer.
Yes.
So why wouldn't I do that? Which, you know what happens when you're injury-free for longer? You tend to grow muscle.
Yeah, who would have thought, right?
Who would have thought? So with that, so that coming back to the whole original thing, it's like I've assigned these rep ranges to these mediums to give me like a kind of a guideline around the resistance profiles and the rep ranges that need to kind of fit with that.
So when we look at hypertrophy, then let's take the squat, or the squat pattern, I guess is probably a better way to put it, for example. So, let's look at a hack squat, probably the most common and most popular between bodybuilders, right? 100%. Sort of the go-to quad builder. Everyone loves it. And obviously it's a great exercise. We all know that. because it's a machine. Yes. And so your approach to this would be a higher rep range. We won't say like numbers, but a higher rep range, we'll say.
Yeah. I'd give it more of the rep range of like a 10, for example, which kind of fits again into that profile of what I was talking about. Yep.
Yeah. So what other exercise would you rather for driving that lower rep range, higher weight type scenario where we're looking at, I guess, a mid-range type exercise?
So like the hack squat to me works out. So the hack squat's kind of like, I don't want to say an anomaly. And this is where it's the without the blanket statement. The hack squat to me is beautiful for a bodybuilder because they can drive the output. And we've touched on this before. So skill versus output in terms of movements is very, very important, especially for, bodybuilders, powerlifters, all kind of clientele from that perspective.
Yes.
It's like, I don't think we should neglect. That's the fuck word I was looking for.
It's all right. It's all right. You're South African. We'll let it go.
It's fine. Yeah. Neglect the squat pattern. It's like, and I'm not saying that every bodybuilder should squat because it's not necessarily, it's not the best hypertrophy tool. We understand that. Once again, a bench press is not the best hypertrophy tool.
Which we know also, yes.
But, and this is where I put the but in there, is we know that load builds muscle really fucking well.
Yep.
Okay. And learning how to get strong, which is a skill, helps us in terms of a periodization plan and helps us in this overall endeavor for building muscle.
Yes.
So I think neglecting, fuck sakes. neglecting.
We got it. That word.
Neglecting the squat pattern from an expression of strength is something that we need to be very mindful of when designing programs, depending on what phase we're in.
Yes.
So moving back to your question in terms of that, I think we could make the exception that a hack squat does fall into that lower rep range. I probably wouldn't go less than 6, in my opinion.
And that's completely fair.
And we can drive load. You're safe there. You're the safest you would ever be in any movement, in my opinion, from a knee flexion squat pattern movement.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
The safest. Yes. So let's try and drive as much load with the benefit of reps there. Yes. That's kind of how I look at it from that. So it's not a cop out from your question, but that's kind of how.
No, that's completely fair because I guess when we look at some of this stuff, and obviously it's always context dependent, exercise dependent, skill based. There's so many factors, and it's so nuanced that it's so difficult to give a blanket answer. And I guess that's kind of the beauty of what we do, right? But that's why we can always play with these things. Yeah. And it's just trying to help those, maybe even those if they're listening that read your post, maybe understand it a little bit more because, like I said, I found your post hilarious. I thought it was gold. But let's say when we do, let's change the exercise then. Let's use something that's probably more commonly, we'll say banded, for example, right? So we'll just keep the context of the bands. Like a pendulum squat, for example, which we know is a great hypertrophy builder. Some would suggest, and some studies would suggest it's probably potentially better for quad growth than the hack squat.
Yep.
Again, quite nuanced, but let's just, for argument's sake, say that. And we have people wanting to band the weakest position, right?
Yep.
In theory, it makes them stronger in a weak position.
In theory, yes.
Yeah, in theory. So I guess where does your sort of philosophy fall on that then?
So my thing is, why are we banding it?
Yep.
Are we banding it because we've maxed out the capability for us to load it?
Yeah, which we know that's never going to happen on a pendulum.
It's never going to happen. So why are we banding it?
Yeah. Well, I guess people would suggest that they're banding it to change its resistance profile, right? Or to give a little bit more tension, in a weaker position. So it doesn't die off.
So, but that's once again, it's like, what is so context around it's like, what are we trying to drive out of that exercise? So I go back to that whole original thing. It's like, why are we now trying to load the weakest position? It doesn't make sense in my index that I've kind of created. So, and I could be completely wrong from that position. Like a banded pendulum to me is fucking terrible. It sucks. It's so shitty. It blows my legs up through the roof. But I don't see, like, unless we're at the point where we've loaded the pendulum that there's no more room to put on it. It's like the progression could last you 4 or 5 years. Like, why are we trying to load that where we could load another exercise more efficiently in that profile. That's and so the question I understand is like, yes, we're trying to load in that weakened position, but it's like, okay, have you maxed out the pendulum squat yet? No.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's simply altering, resistance curves and strength profiles. And
I think we've got to be so careful with that though, because we then land up driving the weight and the tension in the range where we shouldn't be trying to overload that profile.
Yeah. So I guess to that, just as the devil's advocate, according to who?
Well, according to
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, 100%. What I've seen though, and where we start seeing is as soon as we start overloading those positions, it's like, that's where we run out of our runway of progression. And so that gives us that kind of that stone cold wall of like, you go through maybe 10 weeks on the pendulum squat of banning it.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah.
Whereas if you maybe played with a load progression on that, paired with, I don't know, a leg extension. If you really wanted to go there, it's like we could go into a leg extension from that perspective for the shortened range, I suppose. Yeah. It's like we could drive that for maybe, I don't know, a couple of years.
Yeah, I don't know. 100%. And then you can whip a band on it when you do the stack.
And then exactly. It's like, I think we kind of run into this, like, I just want to load, like, I just want to create more tension as much as we can. We're forgetting that load actually makes a big difference.
Yes, for sure.
We're also loading like when we look at like the science around hypertrophy, we're loading the shortened range most of the time.
Yes, 100%.
The shortened range is relative to mid and lengthened, the shittest range for us to load for hypertrophy.
Hence reverse banding.
So it's like, so a reverse band from that perspective, like, does help us and it brings us out of that hole. And I think I use a reverse band for a completely different reason, for example, in a hack squat.
Yes.
Generally because my hips fucked. And if
totally. For me, man, it's my knees are cooked. So I get into the bottom of, I don't know if you've ever seen me hack squat. My butt hits my heels. It doesn't go deeper.
And that's the whole point. It's like, so, we could go into the whole thing of like, once again, do you need the reverse band? Are you doing it because you're actually weak in the shortened position of the hole, the lengthened position in the squat there? It's like, do you just need to actually get better at the squat movement and stay in that progression for longer? Because that could also be a very good option.
Yes.
So I think being very mindful of challenging a range that in the science-based, if we had to go into that, or the science-informed, that's what I prefer to use. The science-informed area from that is like, well, we're not gaining as much hypertrophy from there. So why are we trying to spend as much time as we can there? Or why are we trying to increase resistance in that profile?
Yeah. Well, I guess the overlying principle to that would be, well, we know like what creates skeletal muscle, right? It's tension. So
correct.
Or weight. So I guess that'd be the argument that gets thrown out. It's like simply lift more weight. Or spend more tension.
Or spend more time in terms of the tension or like the metabolic stress, which we would predominantly be in the lengthened range.
Yes.
So
I agree. I agree.
So let's be maybe smarter with our exercise selection in the shortened range to benefit us, not necessarily from a hypertrophy perspective. And this is where I tie kind of the resistance profiles into hypertrophy for longevity. Once again, we can go back to the bicep curl, the high cable bicep curl. It's like the benefits of the high cable bicep curl are not because I'm loading the shortened. I don't really care, to be 100% honest. One, my client gets to do arms 4 times a week. And they're like, fuck, this is the best program ever. Because especially, like, let's be honest, dudes just want to train arms. I have actually all my girls want to train arms as well. It's really weird. And it's like, so they train arms, I don't know, 3-4 times a week. They absolutely love it. I'm getting the benefit of them spending, maybe 2 sets of at least 60 seconds. So it's like another 2 minutes times by 3. It's like they're spending 6 minutes a week in an overhead position. It's like, do you know what we do in life quite a lot? We get into an overhead position and we kind of need to be there.
Yeah.
So I'm now exposing them to the correct manner in terms of being an overhead position. It helps with all of our pressing movements. It helps with longevity of the shoulders, from hypertrophy, from competition in terms of bench press, from general pop. So it's like, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah.
It makes sense. In my opinion.
No, man, I completely agree. And like I said, I just wanted to, I guess, get that across.
And exactly, I like the fact of like playing devil's advocate from this, because I agree. There are certain times where like it doesn't, or not that it doesn't make sense, but like when you look at it from an outsider's view, you could look at it and go like, but it's fine because we're increasing tension there. It's like tension's supposed to build muscle.
Yeah.
And I agree, it does, but it's like, let's just be more effective with the tension. So it's like, I've had this idea for a very long time and I just have stupidly not done it because I hate social media. But like in terms of tempo and like time under tension, I disagree with time under tension for the notion of it should be time under effective tension.
Tension, yeah, of course. So that I completely agree with. I've done podcasts with Dr. Scott Stevenson on it. Completely,
exactly.
Tension.
So it's like, so people get lost in this, like, but it's more time in that range. It's more time there. It's like, okay, but was it effective? Did it actually create any tension?
Yeah. Was it heavy enough effectively? If it's not heavy enough, then don't bother.
Exactly. And from a range perspective as well, like, you know, we get these people who you'll program like an incline dumbbell curl, for example. Incline dumbbell curl is predominantly going to be the lengthened range of the bicep. Okay, predominantly, depending on setup, etc.
Of course, yeah.
But we'll see people write a tempo. It's like, I don't know, maybe like a 2 concentric up, a 2 hold at the top, a 2 down, and maybe so let's just go with 2, 2, 2 because that makes my life so much easier. It's like the 2 we fucking did up here. Do you know what that did? Not much.
Absolutely fuck all.
Pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
So you know what you could have done with that now? 2, 4, 6, 8. What's that? 8 seconds per rep. We could have maybe actually spent those 2 seconds when you stood here.
Yeah.
A little bit longer in the eccentric and a little bit longer in the concentric. And do you know how much more effective that is? Way more. We've actually now created effective tension. So it's like understanding that then tempo needs to correlate to the strength profile that we're using. Obviously, then layering the strength profile or the resistance curve over the whole arching theme of the program in the day. So the microcycle. Now, I then look at that as well as then what's the next day of program going to be as well? Because that also needs to correlate to the day before.
Yes.
It's like, and it's going back to that whole, that, for example, that skill versus expression or skill versus output kind of argument or discussion we were having. It's like what I've been doing a lot lately, especially with my intermediates, is say, for example, we have an upper body day on a Monday, but they're going to have a squat pattern on a Tuesday. Do you know that I prime them for their squat pattern at the end of their Monday session?
And how do you do that?
So it could be, for example, a front foot elevated split squat, which is an anti-rotational exercise, which like most people from that perspective actually need more rotation or need more resistance of rotation. It could also be a dumbbell row because a dumbbell row is a progression of a bird dog.
Yes.
So now I've programmed them, or I've programmed them for the next day to be able to resist the force that is going to happen when we go into squats. And if you start looking at programming that perspective and start looking at it as whatever you end your session or within your session, your overarching theme starts to prime you for the next day. We actually see the performance indicators and like your KPIs around the metrics that you track. You'll see them shoot through the roof because you've now got an effective program. We don't just have Monday being upper and then Tuesday lower. It's like the body isn't separate. Yeah. The last time I checked, it kind of works together. So it's like, why aren't we thinking about that in terms of a whole arching so now taking that principle, going back into resistance profiles, like what exercises can we start to use to actually prime us for those types of things? And that's where I start going down this fucking rabbit hole. Yeah. But it starts to make such a difference within clients' programming, and especially around those that are in some form of pain or some form of discomfort. It's like we can now really make a difference in their overall movement patterns by starting to layer all of these principles, resistance curves, kind of thought programs, that skill versus output, the expression all into one, and like put the lenses together.
Yeah, and that's completely fair enough. I guess off the back of that though, those, I guess, clients or people that you coach that have only access to certain pieces of equipment, right? Which is obviously a big one because, as we know, all gyms aren't created equal, as well as all equipment's not created equal, right? So it's like we see these high level, I guess, highly intelligent social media figures, guys like Coach Casson, guys like Paul Carter, hypertrophy coach Joel Bennett, or Joe Bennett, sorry. like they will put up posts and stories and stuff like that, educational content that, how to make something in a generic gym maybe a little bit better, or how to bias certain things with using bands and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I guess, how does that sort of fall into this?
I think it's a meaningful metric to factor in.
Mm-hmm.
But remember that those personnel or those people
mm-hmm.
are also working with 1%. Yeah. And I think that's something to be very aware of. It's like, I don't know about you,
mm-hmm.
but I did pretty all right on normal machines for the last 12 years.
Yeah.
And built a pretty good foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of people kind of jumping so far into these weeds and into the nuanced stuff that they're forgetting to get fucking strong.
Yeah.
And this was what we kind of spoke about earlier. And when I was talking about, like, the name of the game that we kind of work in is strength training.
Yes.
The last time I checked. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what everyone is forgetting? Strength.
Getting stronger. Yeah.
And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of, like, you don't have to run around trying to squat 400, and you don't have to be the strongest dude in your gym, and you don't have to be the power lifter that is so immobile that they can only get under a bar, from a bench, squat, and deadlift perspective. But understanding that building this generic strength, or this base level strength that we have to understand, benefits us into all of these other realms. So we know most clientele complicate the basics so fucking much.
Yeah.
It's like, let's get our movement patterns down. Let's understand
mm-hmm.
how to squat. Let's understand how to hinge. Let's understand
mm-hmm.
how to do a push and a pull. If we really wanted to go back to the very, very basics, coming kind of from the lines of pull from Ian King, like, that's kind of what it was. It's like, most people can't do that. So why are we so busy trying to chase these 1% if you can't even do that? In my personal opinion, like, when I look at clients from that perspective, it's like, let's start there, build your foundation, or build your base of your pyramid is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, the more I can build the base of the pyramid, the higher I can build the pyramid.
Yes.
And the higher I can get to those 1%.
Yes.
So that's not a deflection on your whole question. I will get there. So my opinion is, we need to go back to the basics, understand that the basics work, understand that you need to get really, really good at the basics. The problem is the basics are fucking boring.
It's true.
Okay, the basics are boring. It's the same thing over and over again. It's like, look at all of the elites. Do you know what they do really well? The basics. Every single time. So we're so busy trying to shortcut it and get the 15 seconds of gratification and kind of like get there as fast as we can. That's like, if you just spent the amount of time fucking around and trying to find the perfect resistance profile with a band to make the prime seated leg extension on your hammer strength.
Yeah.
It's like, just get really good at doing the basics. Yeah. And then we can get there. That's kind of my opinion. Also, 90% of the time, people don't have a good grasp on resistance profiles.
Yes.
Because they don't understand camps. They don't understand that machines are all different. They don't most people look at a machine and they just go, oh yeah, like, it kind of pivots here and it does this. And that's like, I changed the pin and that's it. I can change the pad. I know how to move the pad up higher up my shin. But do you know that, like, the hammer strength versus, I don't know, the Cybex leg extension, the cam actually sits at a different position. So if you're going to try and alter the resistance profile, it's like, you understand you have to do it differently.
Yes.
And people will look at you and be like, oh no, I don't understand that. Or that's even better. It's like the hammer strength versus the Cybex, like, the cog is different.
Yeah.
Your actual cam shape is different. The hammer strength has the fucking one that looks like a nice piece of sourdough bread. Like, that's how I kind of envision it.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. It
looks exactly like a piece of sourdough bread. And if I remember correctly, the Cybex is more rounder or roundish.
Yeah.
So it's like, that changes the resistance profile. But now here you are trying to rig up a band behind the seat onto the leg so that when you get to the top, your fully shortened is, I don't know, more. Fuck. I just see people going into that 1% where we don't have to. We generally don't need to. The gains you're getting out of it, they don't matter for you. They honestly don't. I'd probably argue that they don't matter for us. to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, or just get better at programming. Understand that not everything needs to be hit. And I think this is the other thing that we can kind of go into. It's like all of these guys have started speaking about resistance profiles and like short range, lengthen range, mid range all the time. It's like I've, assessed a couple trainers' programs, and every session, like a leg session, has a mid range, a lengthened, a shortened, a this, and like I'm just like, whoa, fuck! Like you don't have to hit everything in the same day. Like if you understand how your progression works and how your macro cycle works over the week, it's like, hey, like we can just do a mid range and a lengthened today, and then hit some shortened on 2 days' time.
In the next leg there.
And that's, that's the typical, gym bro type of split right now. If you think about it, it's like legs is we squat, we RDL, we hack squat, we leg extension, we leg press. And they're there for 3 hours and they're absolutely fucked. And you sit there going like, hey man, like take 60% of that and move it to your next day and you'll be okay. Like more effective. We understand like from a sets per session day, it's like we're going to get, no chunk volume, if that's a term you use. I don't know.
Yeah, it's something I've definitely gone into and broken down quite a bit.
Yeah. So to summarize everything I've probably just ranted about or gone into, I don't know, just splattered around. It's like, I think we overcomplicate a very simplistic form for 0.5% to 1% of the gains that we could be getting without getting the basics right. I don't know. What's your opinion? It's like if you think about.
No, that's completely fair, dude. Like I said, that wanted to bring it on and just have a chat about it a bit more, training stuff, just because we don't really have many guests yet. I guess doing training, it's mostly PDs and.
I'm sure we can. Just sort that out, change it. So I mean, from your perspective, it's like, what's your take in terms of like the overcomplication of resistance profiles within clients' programs?
Oh, you've seen my programming, I'm sure, from Josh. It's very simplistic.
and that's the point.
And it works. that's the beauty.
It's funny that, hey.
Yeah. Who would have thought simple works? But old school and basics are old school and basics for a reason. And that's why they stay around.
And I think understand. So this is how I look at like old school and basics. Old school and basics works really, really well. And they have been around for years. I think the execution and the prescription of the old school and basics is where we as coaches these days really make the difference. That's where, like, I would rather you understand the simple and basics and understand how to dose them within a week's program or a 10-day cycle, however you program. Like I tend to stay away from 7-day or weekdays, whatever, a calendly week. Yeah. I actually like stuff like cycles of like 12 to 15 days as like being a microcycle or macro cycle, depending on what you term it. And understanding that we could be so much more effective with the way that we dose the old school, the bread and butter, and understanding how to dose that more effectively, and then starting to add the beneficial nuancey type exercises. Again, I'll go back to the high bicep cable curl into that. It's like understanding what that thing gives us ability to touch on in terms of an expression. So it's like the squat, bench, deadlift. If you really want to look at it as a push-pull, kind of like you could run it into that. It works out in the basics of that. So it's like, get those right. Learn how to dose those in effectively. Understand where you could get benefits of challenging a shorten range or a lengthen range. So like in a push day, for example, it's like, don't just sit there drumming down the mid-range. It's like, you know what you could do? You could challenge the shorten range. Like, let's do a cable fly and really emphasize the shortened position. Because the other thing that people forget, and like this is nuancey, and I know I've just kind of shat on nuancey, but let's look at the cable fly. It's like most people, when they perform the cable fly, will spend time in the lengthen range of a cable stack. Okay? Why is that bad? Because of the way that the cables actually pull, it doesn't apply effective tension to the pec. Because what it does is it pulls us out. Not in line, and not converges back in the line that we would need to. So now that we understand resistance profiles and understand what the machine is doing, and this is going into, it's like, who or how many people do you know understand this? No one, but everyone will add a band, for example, some stupid shit. I've seen some of the stupidest things. Anyway, it's like, so now we got a cable pec fly or cable pec press, if you were.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. It's like, spend time in the shortened position.
Yes.
Spend time here. Don't spend time back here. You know, when you spend time back here, when you get on the pec deck, on the machine that actually has the cables that run inwards or adduct, if you kind of wanted to look at that, which follows the line for effective tension when we spend time in the length and range. Yes. So it's like, now we've taken the same movement, in theory, same movement, but we can understand that when to dose them, how to dose them, and be more effective with it. So it's like, I could have someone press twice a week. Yes. On the one day, they start with the cable pec fly, where they can emphasize the short range. We're getting we're reorientation glenohumeral rhythm. So we're now starting to get the scap and the humerus to function correctly, because what would happen when we are in a big press cycle, or generally, we are so controlled with like scaps back and down that we disassociate the glenohumeral rhythm. So it's like, now we reintroduce that. We then go and drive structure or drive output within some form of mid-range movement. Could even be on a machine if you really wanted to, like a machine press. Yes. And then, I don't know, go overhead with a bicep cable curl. Yeah. It's like, now we've touched an overhead position, and I like throwing like to me, that counts as a push day. And then in the second day, it's like, cool, let's drive a mid-range output. Let's drive maybe a little bit more overhead. So let's go with an incline dumbbell press if we wanted to. And you finish with a lengthened pec on the pec deck, and you spend time, you drive hypertrophy there, you drive as much stimulus as you can, and then maybe let's go and do an overhead cable tricep extension. Yeah. We've now put the scap into it, if we can obviously get there, like not my stupid shoulder mobility. So, and here's once again, understanding like lines of pull and the resistance. Like if I can only get here, I make sure that cable starts
goes down
there, not from behind me. Like, if I could get there, I'd put that cable there. But
and you watch everyone lean forward.
Oh, fuck's sakes. But it's like, so once again, I'm looking at it's like, I'm spending time in an overhead position. I'm benefiting from spending time there. It's like, because I can't get there, because dickhead over here is so tight thoracically that he's, can't do that. Yes. So you know what I do is my goal is to get here. Yes, that's the goal. But I can't just go there right now, because I'll get shoulder impingement and I'll die. So I start here. Yes. And the program starts here, and I do my tricep work, and eventually I get overhead, because that's what the goal is. That's what I want to do. I want to spend time there. It's like, I'm not spending time there once again for 6 to 8 reps. I'm spending time there for 12 to 15 with the cable, and fucking trying to really drive that there. We get the better and added benefit of, hypertrophy. We get the benefits of being in an overhead position, scapular position. It's like, fuck, why wouldn't we do that? Yep. It's basics, though. We've gone through 3 exercises which are literally have got nothing to do. Like you don't need a special prime press or an Atlant. Like you don't need anything for those 3 exercises that I've just spoken about. But you understand that if you go and you do those 3 exercises effectively, it's like you'll probably grow and be functional. Yes. Like and injury free. Yes. Like that, and
that's the goal.
That's the goal.
Get bigger or stronger without getting injured, obviously.
Correct. We spend more time growing. We spend more time being better. Yeah, and that's how I look at programming. Yeah, and then
we keep healthy. So why not? Yeah,
we keep healthy. We keep going, and then we add some form of progressive overload structure to that. Whether that's, I prefer reps, to be honest, like reps until a certain point where we then have to do sets, because an increase in set to me is a ginormous amount of volume that suddenly changes. And like one of the big ones that I like and get across to my clients quite a lot from that perspective is progressive overload doesn't have to happen week to week. Progressive overload can happen every 4 weeks. It can happen every 6 weeks.
Yes.
It's like we're like, that's a big thing for me. So what a lot of my clients do, in the way that I structure it, is like, I want you to progressively overload every 2 weeks, because then I also know that wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just a randomly good day, because like, I don't know about you, you've had really good days with like
100%.
It's like suddenly up, it feels amazing.
Flies. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Everything's on, and you're like, wow, fuck, what's going on? And then next week you don't hit those numbers, and you're like, I need to deload. Yeah. It's like, no, you know what could have happened is like, you just try and hit those numbers for 2 weeks. Instead of jumping 10 kilos on your bench press, you just stay at the same as you did last week. If your metrics stay the same, it's like, cool. You know what I do? I either increase reps, I either put, I don't know, 2.5 kilos on 5 pounds, whatever the fuck it is.
Yeah.
It's like, and then I keep going.
I like it. Simples.
And yeah, simples. I don't know. It frustrates me how like over complex we make things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like I said, you've seen the programs that I run, so they're very, very basic, very simple.
It works. It works every single time.
All right, man. So to finish up, I tend to ask one question, and it seems to stump a lot of people. I think we won't stump you on this one, but 3 Instagram accounts you follow that better your day-to-day life, whether they be educational, whether they be humorous, whether they just be completely and utterly, out of the left field. Who is it that you follow that makes your day a little bit better?
So one I follow, his name is James Thayer. He's actually one of the Prescript boys. I follow him purely because me and him get on really well from a banter perspective. It's like I can always talk shit with him and he pulls me up on my shit and just makes my day better. So shout out James there. Second one that I follow, and I'm going to butcher the name, but it's like Golden Retrievers of Instagram or something stupid. It's something along those lines. Obviously I have a Golden Retriever. That's pretty much what it is. And then the one that I follow that no one will hope or probably not know is I follow from when I was involved in the firearms industry. I follow an account called T-Rex Arms. And T-Rex Arms is like, he makes holsters and a whole bunch of gun gear and all of that. And I absolutely love it. It was the holster that I used. He produces like amazing like shooting videos and just like graphics is there. That's like, I think as coaches, we should always have that outside hobby type of thing to take us away and hopefully be able to switch off from that. That's my way. Like I live vicariously through him now, considering I'm in a country that does not allow guns. So that's kind of where I live. That has nothing to do with training other than James Thayer. To be 100% honest, like James Thayer is a gun in terms of quite a lot of things. I would highly recommend anyone getting on with him. And I actually highly recommend you reaching out to him and I'll put you in contact for a podcast. I think he would be a really good guest.
Sounds good.
He's very, very switched on. That had nothing to do with training on all 3. So probably completely not what you were expecting, but those are the 3 that I follow.
That's kind of the point. It's kind of like, it's funny. I think a lot of people, when you get people on, they always think, well, everything they do must be to do with work or training. It's like, no, we have lives. Like we have many accounts that we like. Yeah. That's kind of what I like from that perspective, I guess. Well, thank you, good sir, for jumping on. And I appreciate for those that want to get in contact with you, where can they find you?
Probably the easiest is just Instagram. So that's Coach James Mack. You could get hold of me on my website. It's performanceprogramming.net. Probably DM me on Instagram. That's just the simplest. Unfortunately, that's where we live these days. So that's the simplest medium. And we just kind of go from there, man.
Beautiful. Thanks for jumping on, good sir. And we'll have you on again soon for some fun.
I appreciate it, man. That was good. Thanks for letting me vent.
All good, my man. Thank you, as always, also to the listeners for jumping on. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM James. Thanks, guys.